Right now, someone is staring at a glowing screen, completely paralyzed by three little gray dots. They are watching that iMessage typing bubble dance, desperately praying it does not just vanish into the void. Someone else is feeling physically sick to their stomach because they just got left on red. The terrifying realization of being completely ghosted is making their chest genuinely ache. Now, here's the question that changes how you look at all of this. Did cavemen get their hearts broken too? Here is the exact detail that completely changes how we understand a breakup. For decades, society has casually treated heartbreak as a purely metaphorical problem. We tell people to just get over it. We assume the pain is entirely manufactured in their imagination. We treat emotional devastation like a temporary glitch in maturity. We act like it is not a legitimate medical condition. But back in 2003, researchers at UCLA decided to actually look inside the human head during a moment of intense social rejection. What they found inside that laboratory in California permanently destroyed the divide between physical and emotional trauma. The setup for this groundbreaking study published in Science magazine was almost painfully simple. They put innocent volunteers inside a massive fMRI scanner. This machine is essentially a giant buzzing magnetic tube that tracks real-time blood flow to different regions of the human brain. While trapped inside this noisy device, the participants were given a small screen. They were told to play a basic video game called Cyberball. It was basically a digital version of playing catch with two other players online. The volunteers genuinely believed they were interacting with two other real human beings. They assumed these strangers were sitting in different rooms across the university campus. For the first few minutes, everything was perfectly normal. The digital ball was tossed evenly among all three players. It created a mundane but satisfying rhythm of human cooperation. Then the researchers deliberately flipped the script. The two other digital players suddenly stopped throwing the ball to the volunteer. They just kept tossing it back and forth to each other. They completely ignored the human participant for the rest of the game. It was a digital simulation of a classic childhood nightmare. It perfectly mimicked the terrible feeling of being suddenly excluded from the middle school lunch table. Even though the volunteers knew this was just a meaningless computer program, the sudden isolation felt genuinely awful. They reported feeling angry. They felt excluded. They were visibly stressed by this incredibly mild form of social rejection. But the real story was not what they were feeling emotionally. The true revelation was what the fMRI machine was recording biologically. The monitors tracking their brain activity suddenly lit up in two very specific areas. The anterior cingulate cortex and the right ventral prefrontal cortex went absolutely into overdrive. This spike happened the exact moment the virtual ball stopped coming their way. Why is that specific neurological map so incredibly important? Because those are the exact same regions of the brain that process the agonizing sensation of physical pain. The brain was reacting to a digital cold shoulder in a very visceral way. It fired the exact same way it would if someone accidentally slammed their fingers in a car door. It mirrored the neurological panic of stepping barefoot on a sharp piece of glass. The neural circuitry clearly does not have a separate alarm system for feeling left out. To your central nervous system, a broken relationship and a broken femur are essentially processed in the exact same biological department. This means the heavy, suffocating weight you feel in your chest when someone texts you that they need space is not you being overly dramatic. Your brain is generating a very real, scientifically measurable physical pain response. It is reacting violently to the sudden loss of a social bond. Evolution wired our biology so deeply into our social connections that it uses bodily agony as an emergency flare. It is trying to warn us that we are being abruptly separated from our tribe. You are experiencing a legitimate physiological trauma response masquerading as a sad playlist. It just happens to be a broken bone that no emergency room doctor can actually put a cast on. You tell yourself you are absolutely done with them. You swear to your friends over expensive iced lattes that you have moved on completely and closed that chapter forever. Then it hits midnight on a random Tuesday. You find yourself sitting alone in your apartment, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of your phone screen. You are 3 years deep into the Instagram grid of their new coworker. You are doom scrolling through completely meaningless TikTok reposts, trying to decipher hidden messages that do not actually exist in reality. Your rational brain knows this digital stalking is completely toxic and entirely unproductive. It knows you are willingly subjecting yourself to unnecessary psychological torture. You desperately want to stop looking at their digital footprint, but your thumb simply refuses to close the application. Now, let's get into the stuff that really blew my mind when I first read about it. This obsessive late-night behavior is not a character flaw or a sign of personal weakness. In 2010, biological anthropologist Dr. Helen Fisher published a landmark study in the Journal of Neurophysiology that completely redefined our entire understanding of romantic rejection. She took people who had recently been dumped and essentially mapped their ongoing misery using advanced brain scans. She was looking for the exact neurological coordinates of a broken heart trying to hold on to the past. She naturally expected to see activity in regions associated with standard sadness or mild social anxiety. Instead, she found explosive neural activity deep within the ventral tegmental area. Scientists casually refer to this highly specialized region as the VTA. This tiny biological factory sits near the base of your brain and completely controls your dopamine pathways. It is the exact same primitive reward system that governs basic survival functions like craving water in a desert. It is also the exact same circuitry hijacked by severe substance abuse. When you fall in love, your VTA floods your central nervous system with staggering amounts of dopamine. It creates an incredibly powerful neurochemical dependency on that one specific person. When they suddenly leave your life, that biological supply chain is violently shut down without any advanced warning. Your brain does not process this as a sad emotional event or a standard social disappointment. Your brain processes this as a life-threatening chemical deficit. Romantic rejection triggers the exact same biological responses as a clinical withdrawal syndrome. Love is not merely a poetic metaphor for a powerful drug. It is a highly addictive chemical substance manufactured directly inside your own skull. It is real. You are hooked. You are withdrawing. Your late-night social media stalking is just your desperate central nervous system trying to secure a tiny microscopic hit of dopamine from a familiar digital face. This entirely changes the standard medical paradigm of post-breakup recovery. Medical professionals observe the exact same physical symptoms in heartbroken individuals as they do in patients undergoing clinical drug rehabilitation. People experience severe insomnia, drastic loss of appetite, uncontrollable physical tremors, and incredibly deep depressive episodes. Their higher cognitive functions become severely impaired because the brain is devoting all its available metabolic energy to managing the sudden chemical drought. This is exactly why you cannot simply logic your way out of missing someone. You cannot just journal your way out of a severe neurochemical deficit. You feel entirely out of control because on a purely neurological level, you actually are out of control. Your prefrontal cortex is trying its absolute best to be rational, but your primitive reward center is screaming for its missing fix. The biological organism is frantically trying to restore its internal chemical balance by any means necessary. That means compelling you to look at old photographs or endlessly reread ancient text messages. It overrides your common sense to secure that fleeting feeling of connection. It is a fundamental survival mechanism operating completely independent of your conscious will. Your body is treating the physical absence of your ex as a critical physiological emergency that must be resolved immediately. Okay, but here is the question I know has been forming in your mind this entire time. If a broken heart literally shuts down your higher cognitive functions, why would nature design us this way? Evolution is supposed to be an incredibly efficient process that optimizes an organism for absolute survival. It actively eliminates traits that make a species weak or vulnerable to predators. So why would millions of years of natural selection intentionally install a massive self-destruct button inside your chest? Why create all this profound agony just because someone decided they did not want to date you anymore? The answer lies in a brilliant but exceptionally cruel biological hack. This happened millions of years before we ever built our first cities. According to a foundational 2005 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by MacDonald and Leary, our nervous system pulled off a massive shortcut. It essentially borrowed its social alarm circuitry directly from our physical pain system. Evolution did not bother to build a brand new neural network from scratch to handle complex social dynamics. It simply co-opted the existing biological infrastructure that was already effectively keeping us away from burning fires. It hijacked the raw sensation of physical agony. To understand exactly why this extreme measure was necessary, we have to look at our prehistoric origins. Today, we live in a culture that aggressively romanticizes the lone wolf. We are constantly conditioned to worship hyper-independence and idolize the rugged self-made pioneer who relies on absolutely nobody. We celebrate the idea of standing completely alone and pride ourselves on being entirely self-sufficient in our comfortable metropolitan apartments. But out on the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Pleistocene savanna, the rules were radically different. That kind of fierce personal independence was not something to be proud of. It was an absolute biological death sentence. A human being standing alone is fundamentally a very weak animal. We do not have thick protective fur to survive freezing nights or lethal venom to neutralize massive threats. We completely lack the immense muscular density required to fight off a hungry apex predator. Our one and only evolutionary advantage was our profound ability to cooperate with each other. Human infants are born completely helpless and require an incredibly massive amount of collective tribal energy just to reach adulthood. Mammalian survival is entirely dependent on the continuous protection of the herd. Because of this undeniable reality, social isolation was not just a temporary emotional inconvenience. Isolation meant certain and immediate death. If you wandered too far from the safety of the collective campfire, you were inevitably going to be eaten in the dark. If the tribe decided to exile you, your fate was entirely sealed. Failing to maintain your critical social bonds meant you were going to freeze to death or slowly starve alone in the wilderness. Nature realized a harsh mathematical truth about our species. Staying intimately connected to other humans was the single most critical factor for keeping your genetic lineage alive. Therefore, the brain desperately needed an internal alarm system that was utterly impossible to ignore. It had to force you to maintain your social connections at absolutely all costs. The agonizing emotional pain you feel during a devastating breakup is simply that ancient system working. It is functioning exactly as it was originally designed to function. Your conscious mind knows that you are perfectly safe sitting alone on your living room couch. Your rational brain logically understands that losing this specific partner does not actually mean you are going to starve to death. But your primitive nervous system does not understand modern civilization. When your deep social bond is abruptly severed, your ancient biology panics because it genuinely believes you have just been abandoned by the tribe. It floods your body with pure agony to compel you to seek connection. It hurts. It is brutal. It is survival. But the medical detail that actually stopped me completely cold has absolutely nothing to do with your brain. We have spent this entire time talking strictly about advanced neuroscience and evolutionary psychology. We have thoroughly examined the pain of a severe breakup as a complex neurological illusion generated by a panicked central nervous system. The nervous system is indeed sounding a massive biological alarm to keep you alive. But that internal alarm system is directly wired into the rest of your physical body. The emotional devastation does not just stay trapped inside the prefrontal cortex or the primitive reward centers. It travels rapidly down the vagus nerve and slams directly into your primary cardiovascular system. The metaphorical concept of a broken heart is not just dramatic poetry. It is a highly documented and incredibly dangerous physiological reality. Every single year, countless individuals walk through the automatic sliding doors of hospital emergency rooms, desperately clutching their chests. They approach the triage desk under the harsh fluorescent lights, actively struggling for every single breath. They report a sudden crushing physical weight sitting directly on their sternum. They describe a severe radiating numbness shooting rapidly down their left arm. The attending physicians immediately initiate standard cardiac protocols to save a life. They hook the panicking patient up to an EKG machine to monitor the electrical signals of the heart. The jagged lines appearing on the medical monitor strongly indicate a massive and potentially fatal myocardial infarction. The immediate blood tests show significantly elevated cardiac enzymes indicating active muscle tissue damage. The entire medical staff rushes to intervene because every single biological metric points to a classic heart attack. Then the attending cardiologists look closely at the coronary arteries and find something absolutely baffling. There are no massive blood clots blocking the critical blood flow. There is no severe arterial plaque buildup from years of unhealthy diets. The arteries are completely clear and functioning perfectly. The doctors are forced to look beyond standard cardiovascular disease and diagnose a condition known clinically as Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. The broader medical community and elite institutions like the Mayo Clinic more commonly refer to this exact phenomenon as broken heart syndrome. This is not just a severe psychological panic attack masquerading as physical discomfort. It is a severe structural failure of the heart muscle triggered entirely by extreme emotional distress. A devastating breakup literally breaks the physical machinery inside your chest. The underlying biology of this cardiac syndrome is absolutely fascinating and incredibly violent. When you experience a world-shattering emotional trauma, your sympathetic nervous system initiates a catastrophic biological response. It dumps a massive and highly toxic wave of stress hormones directly into your central bloodstream. This overwhelming flood of adrenaline and cortisol rushes straight toward your most vital organs. The sheer volume of these aggressive stress chemicals effectively stuns the cardiac muscle cells upon impact. This sudden chemical assault temporarily paralyzes the left ventricle of the heart. That specific muscular chamber is the main pumping powerhouse of your entire cardiovascular system. The bottom of the ventricle physically balloons outward and completely stops contracting properly. Your heart genuinely changes its anatomical shape under the unbearable weight of your romantic grief. The organ becomes visibly deformed and violently struggles to pump oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. The physical symptoms you experience are completely indistinguishable from a traditional heart attack because your heart is genuinely failing in real time. Your emotional suffering has successfully materialized into a tangible medical emergency, requiring intensive hospital care and continuous observation. This biological phenomenon proves that the barrier between your emotional reality and your physical body is entirely non-existent. Your heart is literally breaking under the invisible evolutionary pressure of profound social rejection. The agonizing pain you feel is not just in your head, it is written directly into your human anatomy. When you zoom out and look at the entire scope of human history, a profound realization begins to emerge. We have spent countless generations deeply misunderstanding the fundamental nature of our own romantic grief. We have actively conditioned ourselves to view a broken heart as a pathetic weakness. We treat it as a humiliating lack of basic emotional control. We constantly apologize for our messy tears. We frantically try to hide our biological desperation from everyone around us. But the grueling fossil record and the undeniable neurochemistry tell a completely different story about who we really are. That devastating pain is not a glitch in your psychological programming. It is the exact evolutionary mechanism that successfully allowed our ancient ancestors to conquer the entire planet. If those early hominids walking across the dangerous African savanna did not feel absolute agony when separated from their mates, they would have casually wandered off into the darkness alone. They would have been effortlessly hunted into total extinction. We only exist today because our primitive predecessors possessed a nervous system that violently punished them for being isolated. We are the direct genetic descendants of creatures who loved each other so intensely that losing that connection literally hurt. Our survival depended entirely on our capacity to suffer. This brings us directly back to that glowing screen we discussed at the very beginning. Right now, there is someone sitting alone in the driver's seat of a parked car in a deserted Target parking lot. The massive red neon bullseye is reflecting faintly across their tear-stained windshield in the cold night. They are staring down at a painfully silent iMessage thread. They are gripping the steering wheel. They are completely overwhelmed by the crushing humiliation of being entirely ghosted. They feel absolutely ridiculous for crying over someone who could not even bother to send a simple text message back. They feel incredibly small. They feel hopelessly stupid. They feel entirely disconnected from the rest of the functioning world. They are desperately wiping their eyes next to a cold coffee cup, wishing they could just be strong enough to simply not care. They genuinely believe their unbearable sadness is just a pitiful symptom of their own modern insecurity. But they are completely wrong. That young person, sobbing quietly in their vehicle, is not being pathetic at all. They are actually experiencing the raw, unfiltered echo of 3.5 million years of successful human evolution. That heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on their chest is the exact same biological alarm that kept humanity alive through brutal ice ages. It is the exact same chemical fire that protected us from terrifying predators. The desperate urge to be connected to another human being is not a modern psychological defect created by romantic comedies. It is the most powerful survival software ever written into a mammalian brain. The very fact that you are capable of feeling this much excruciating pain over losing someone proves that your biology is working perfectly. It proves you carry the ancient legacy of a species that realized they could only survive this chaotic universe by holding on to each other. You are not falling apart. You are simply remembering how to survive. Your body is doing exactly what it was built to do. We always assume that human beings learned how to love only after we built a safe civilization. We think culture created our deep romance. We assume society taught us how to attach to one another. We believe that vulnerability is a luxury of the modern age. But the biological truth is exactly the opposite. Heartbreak actually built the human race.